constitutionally repugnant Reconstruction Acts imposed the 14th Amendment via martial law powers in time of peace. Original research compiled by Jeffrey Jacob Caputo for the State Nationals Association. Additional commentary enclosed in brackets and presented in bold italics type by Anna Maria Riesinger. Forward by Anna Maria. The information presented here was, except for the noted additions, first presented to me in more or less this form, absent format, many years ago. I agreed not to publish it while the authors were still alive for fear of reprisals by the agents of the U.S. Incorporated and USA Incorporated, respectively. This past week I received word that Jeffrey Jacob Caputo is no longer with us. I grieve that such a spirited and gifted researcher is gone, but I am pleased to share the fruits of his long and diligent search for truth. At the time, most of us were slowly awakening, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, to the actual situation our country is in and which we all face together. The idea that we had been occupied by our own military for 150 years seemed absurd. The idea that we were not being recognized as Americans but were instead being misrepresented as territorial and/or municipal citizens was even harder to swallow. The whole craziness of the World Bank pretending that our assets were abandoned, and the idea that our government was an interregnum ranked right up there with all the other aspects of living in the land of Oz, strawman, flying monkeys included. But still, year after year indeed, decade after decade, we silently soldiered onward and upward. It is with pain, but also real relief, that we can now stand our ground and affirm the diagnosis, and having ascertained the nature of the problem, we are finally gifted with the insight and means to address it. For those who are just getting started, some of the commentary here will seem odd, as if we sometimes lapse into a foreign language where words don't seem to mean quite what you normally assume they mean, and if so, you are absolutely right. Let's provide just the barest introduction. Our American government, comprised of the United States, soil, and the United States of America, land, and sea, is separate and different from our federal subcontractors, the United States of America, delegated sea powers, and the United States, delegated air powers. Our American government doesn't derive from any constitution, and we ourselves are not bound by one. Contrary to what many Americans have been taught, our rights and guarantees don't come from the constitutions. Our natural and unalienable rights come from nature and nature's God. Rather, the constitutions serve the noble purpose of circumscribing and limiting the powers of the so-called federal government. Page 1 of 15. In this timeline-style presentation Jeffrey provided, you will find one of the most succinct and accurate demonstrations of what went on in the wake of the Civil War, how we got into the situation we now face, and how we came to be presumed to be citizens of the United States instead of known to be Americans. Please read through the step-by-step, year-by-year presentation of acts by the territorial United States Congress and the comparisons against the actual Constitution. Requirements. Feel free to rummage through the proclamations and executive orders of Andrew Johnson. Ruminate about what was happening in the wake of the Civil War, the conditions then impacting the entire country. A vacuum of power created by Lincoln. Death, the ongoing ruination of the Southern Confederacy, the bankruptcy of the Northern Confederation, the terrible wounds of the Civil War, the moral and economic specters posed by slavery as an institution, the use and misuse of the municipal Roman civil law to secretively continue to promote enslavement of criminals under the territorial government's 14th Amendment. Let it dawn on you that we are still grappling with issues of slavery today, that the reconstruction of our lawful American government was barely started, much less ever completed, and that our federal subcontractors, both territorial and municipal, usurped upon their employers and have evaded their constitutional obligations for the better part of a century via the use of legalese and other forms of fraud and deceit. Because this false kingdom of corporations acting as governments was built on lies and obfuscations from the start, we have had many layers of onion to peel through and many avenues of inquiry to pursue. But as a bedrock base to start from and to fully inform yourselves, you are blessed to have Jeffrey as a guide and me as your friend on the journey. It's far easier to track things down when you have the benefit of a stalwart man with a machete blazing the trail for you and a faithful navigator with a map. Let us begin. Anna Maria. February 2021, page 2 of 15. The timeline: January 31st, 1865, 13th Amendment proposed to the states. Can only be territorial. Confederate states, that is. states of states, because our actual states were not in session. Added, April 15, 1865, President Lincoln assassinated. May 10, 1865, President Johnson proclaimed the end of the hostilities on land with the only duty left to arrest the former insurgency's vessels at sea. Added, June 22, 1865, last shot of the Civil War fired by the CSS Shenandoah in the Bering Sea. The states that ratified the 13th Amendment. February 9, 1865, Virginia. February 17, Louisiana. April 7, Tennessee. April 14, Arkansas. November 13, South Carolina. December 2nd, Alabama. December 4th, North Carolina. Note that these can only be states, Confederate states, not our actual states, which were not in session. This resulted in adding the 13th Amendment to the Territorial Constitution. December 4th, 1865, renegade members of the 39th Congress, at the inception of the first session, suggested the denial of seats in the House and the Senate to the Southern states on the baseless allegation that they had legal governments and were in rebellion. December 6, 1865, Georgia ratifies 13th Amendment. December 18, 1865, 13th Amendment was declared ratified, but can only refer to the Territorial Constitution and territorial states of states voting as Confederate states. December 28, 1865, Florida again ratified on June 9, 1868, upon its adoption of a new municipal constitution. March 3, 1866, 39th Congress resolves the denial of seats in the House and the Senate to the Southern states in the House on baseless allegations of rebellion. April 2, 1866, President Johnson proclaimed the insurrection at an end in all the Southern states, except it was further proclaimed that each state's civil authority was to be restored and that they had shown sufficient evidence of loyalty to the Union by conforming to Johnson's policies of incorporating the 13th Amendment into legislation. This can only be the presumed to exist territorial union, as the actual union of physical states isn't subject to a constitution. June 16, 1866, 14th Amendment, called Article 14, was proposed by the 39th Congress first session by Joint Resolution 48 to the legislatures of the several states. However, the actual several states were not in session, so this was an act of fraud and an attempt to circumvent. Page 3 of 15. Due process, which requires that in international jurisdictions, the states be addressed via their states. Also notice that despite attempts to do so, this action could not ultimately be passed as an article to any kind of constitution, but only as an amendment subject to removal by later generations. August 20th, 1866, President Johnson further proclaimed peace on and gave notice of the resumption of civil government in the states of states, which had seceded. Note again the practice of confusing states of states with states. Confederate states of states organizations from both the North and South fought the Civil War. None of the actual states were involved, and neither was their Federation of States, the United States of America. October 1866 to 1867, Southern and non-Southern states reject the 14th Amendment. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and many non-Southern states. February 8, 1867, 1 month before the first Reconstruction Act was colorably implemented, the 39th Congress introduced Bill 1143 entitled, "A Bill to Establish an Additional Article of War for the More Complete Suppression of the Insurrection against the United States." March 2, 1867, First Reconstruction Act colorably enacted. President Johnson vetoes the act. March 23, 1867, Second Reconstruction Act. President Johnson vetoes the act. July 19, 1867, Third Reconstruction Act. President Johnson vetoes the act. March 11, 1868, Fourth Reconstruction Act. June 25, 1868, North Carolina, South Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida are colorably readmitted back into the Union of Territorial States as a new body politic of a 14th Amendment citizenry due to adopt the 14th Amendment. The actual states could not be readmitted to the American Union because they never left the Federation. They seceded from the Confederation only. July 9, 1868, 14th Amendment was imposed under color of law due to 28 territorial states of states alleged ratification of it